Everyone warned Reviel to leave me before the wedding. He stayed anyway, and what happened next destroyed not just my family, but every version of the truth I'd been handed since birth. I was 31 years old, and I had never once told a lie that mattered. That's what made it so grotesque. The fact that the lies had been told about me, layered so carefully over the years that even I had started to press my fingers against them, wondering if they were real, wondering if the version of Miralee Vash that existed in my mother's house bore any resemblance to the one who stood barefoot in Reviel's kitchen at midnight, eating cold rice and talking about the Caspian Sea. It was a Tuesday when everything unraveled. 14 days before our wedding. 14. I remember the number because I had a countdown pinned above my desk. One of those paper chains you make as a child, tearing off a ring each morning. I'd made it the week before, a ridiculous, tender gesture, and I had just torn off the link that said 14 when my phone buzzed with a message from Reviel. "Can you come to your parents' house tonight? Your dad wants to talk to us. Together." I didn't feel dread, not immediately. I felt something stranger, a low vibration in my sternum, like a cello string struck and then muffled with a palm. I told myself it was nothing. Reviel was close with my father, Osbert. They played chess over the phone, sent each other links to articles about obscure Cold War satellite programs. Osbert liked Reviel in the particular way older men like younger men who remind them of who they wanted to be. Composed, certain, slow to speak. Whatever this was, I told myself, it was manageable. I drove the 40 minutes to my parents' house in Verinden, a town so small it had a bakery and an opinion about everything. The sky was the gray of old aluminum. I parked in the driveway behind Reviel's blue hatchback and sat for a moment, hands still on the wheel, watching the lit window of the dining room. Shadows moved inside. More than two people's shadows. My mother, Gwyneth, opened the door before I knocked. She was wearing an expression I had catalogued many times over the years, a kind of sculpted concern, eyebrows low, mouth slightly parted, the face she wore when she was about to present a wound she had been keeping warm. "Miralee," she said, and hugged me the way you hug someone you have already decided to sacrifice. Inside, the dining table held 4 chairs and 3 people. Osbert sat at the head. Reviel sat to his left, spine straight, hands folded. There was a woman I didn't recognize at first, and then I did because the body remembers things the mind discards. She was older now, maybe 55, her hair the dull bronze of a coin that has passed through too many hands. Her name was Druska, and she had been my mother's closest friend for almost a decade before she vanished from our lives when I was 17. No explanation ever given, just gone. I sat down across from Reviel. He met my eyes, and his expression was the opposite of what I feared. He looked calm, not the stiff calm of a man containing anger, but the actual calm of someone who has decided to be a steady surface in turbulent water. I felt the cello string vibrate again. Then Osbert cleared his throat. He said, "She's a liar, always has been." He was looking at Reviel, not at me, at Reviel, as if I were a document being reviewed rather than a person in the room. "Osbert," Reviel started, "let me finish." My father's voice was the voice he used when he wanted to sound reluctant, but had been rehearsing for days. "She has a secret child." I heard the words. I did not understand them for a moment. Not because the words were complicated, but because they referred to a reality that did not exist. And the mind takes an extra beat to process statements that are simply, structurally, untrue. Then my mother leaned forward, placed her hand on Reviel's forearm, and whispered, "Don't let her trap you too." I did not argue. I know people expect that part to be different. They expect the wrongly accused woman to stand up, to shout, to demand answers, to weave her innocence into the air like something visible. I did none of that. I sat very still. I looked at Reviel's hands. I thought about the paper chain above my desk, the link that said 14 now torn and sitting in my bathroom wastebasket. Then Reviel reached into his jacket pocket, and he took out his phone. He opened a photo. He turned the screen toward Osbert and Gwyneth and Druska, and then, slowly, toward me. He asked, Is this the child? The photo was a baby, newborn, probably 2 or 3 days old, that particular red and scrunched look of the very new. The photo had the grainy quality of something scanned from a print. In the corner, someone had written in blue ink, August 1993. I was born in November 1993. My mother's face did something I had never seen a human face do. It didn't fall, it emptied, like water draining from a glass that had appeared solid a moment before. "Where did you get that?" Druska said. Her voice was a very different voice than the one she'd used for the soft, conspiratorial performance of the last 10 minutes. This voice was smaller and carried a different kind of weight, the weight of something that had been stored for a long time in a place nobody was supposed to find. Reviel put his phone face down on the table. He was still looking at me, and I realized I was shaking, not from fear, but from something that felt like standing at the edge of a very high place and understanding that the drop is both real and survivable. "I'll start over," Reviel said. "3 weeks ago, I hired someone to do a background check. Not on Miralee." He paused. "On her parents." I had known Reviel for 4 years. I had loved him for 3 of those years with the specific love you develop for someone who treats your interior life as seriously as his own. I had thought I understood the dimensions of his mind. I had not understood until this moment that he had been watching, not suspiciously, but carefully. The way a naturalist watches, documenting rather than interfering. "I hired someone because I noticed things," Reviel continued, still speaking quietly, still looking at me with that steady surface. "Inconsistencies in family stories, the way certain years were never mentioned. The photograph Miralee showed me once, her parents' wedding photo, dated 1989, which should have made Gwyneth around 22. But the woman in that photo looked 35 at minimum. I thought I was wrong. I measured it against other things. I wasn't wrong. Gwyneth said, 'This is inappropriate.' Gwyneth," my father's voice was thin now, "this is a private family." "The baby in the photo," Reviel said, "was born to Gwyneth Vash, née Orteland, in August 1993. The birth was registered in the Verindon district under a sealed adoption file. The adopting parents' names were redacted. The biological father is listed on the original document as Osbert Vash." I heard myself breathe. "Miralee is not their secret child," Reviel said. "Miralee is that child. She was adopted. In November 1993, a different family took her in, a family who had been told the child was abandoned. They are the people who raised her. The people in this room are the biological parents she was never told existed." The silence that followed was not a dramatic silence. It was the silence of a machine that has just stopped. I looked at Gwyneth. She was not my mother. She was my biological mother who had given me up and then, inexplicably, engineered a situation in which she became my adoptive mother's neighbor, her friend, her family's intimate. She had watched me grow up. She had come to my school plays. She had given me a birthday card every year with love, Gwen signed in careful cursive. She had been present at the threshold of every significant moment of my life, not as a mother, but close enough to smell it, close enough to feel the warmth of it without having to carry the weight. And when I had found someone who loved me, someone steady and clear-eyed and good, she had sat across a table from him and called me a liar. I thought about what it takes to do that. What calculus of self-preservation produces that particular act? To preemptively destroy the reputation of the child you abandoned, to ensure she cannot be believed, to inoculate the man who loves her against trusting her. It is not cruelty for its own sake. It is something more specific. It is the cruelty of someone who needs the secret buried more than they need the child to flourish. It is the cruelty of maintenance. Druska was the one who spoke next. She had gone gray-faced, the bronze hair suddenly garish against it. "You have to understand the time," she said. It was such a Druska thing to say, the reflexive reach for context, for mitigation. In 1993 in Verindon, an unmarried pregnancy— "They weren't unmarried," Reviel said. "The wedding photo was dated 1989. Miralee was born 4 years into the marriage." The word shame is too small for what I watched travel across Gwyneth's face. It was something with more mass than shame. It was the specific expression of a person who has managed for decades to avoid looking directly at themselves and who is now being made to sit very still and look. I thought about my adoptive parents, Rowan and Seela, who raised me, who I had believed were my biological parents until this moment, who had been dead for 6 and 3 years respectively, which meant they could not be asked, which meant this secret had been designed to outlast the people most capable of answering for it. I thought about my childhood in the house on Creel Street, which had been 3 blocks from where Gwyneth and Osbert lived. 3 blocks, a 7-minute walk. I used to cut through their backyard to get to school. My throat was doing something complicated. I was not crying. I understood that I would cry later, probably alone, probably in the car, probably for a long time. But right now, I was too busy watching my entire personal history get reoriented. All the furniture of meaning shifted 3 degrees, and everything in the room suddenly occupying a slightly different position than it had when I walked in. Osbert had not spoken in several minutes. He was looking at the table. He looked, I thought, relieved. And that was the thing that gutted me most cleanly. That's the detail that still lives in my chest when I think about that room. He looked relieved, as though the decades of maintenance, the years of proximity, the surveillance of my life from just close enough to observe and just far enough to deny, all of it had been a burden he'd been waiting to put down. He had not called me a liar to protect himself. He had called me a liar because he was tired of the performance, and the only way he knew to end it was to destroy the stage. I stood up. Not dramatically. I didn't knock my chair back or raise my voice. I stood up the way you stand up at the end of a long flight, carefully, taking stock of the ground beneath you. I looked at Rehearsal. He was already looking at me. He had his jacket half off the back of the chair, the way he did when he was about to leave somewhere. He was waiting for me. I need to ask you something, I said to Gwyneth. She looked up. Her eyes were wet, but her jaw was set. The particular configuration of a woman who has spent her life mastering the act of crying without appearing to have surrendered. Did you love watching me? All those years from 3 blocks away? Did it feel like love? Because I need to know if that was what you were trying to get without paying for it. The way you can watch a fire from a window and feel warm without having to tend it. She didn't answer. I hadn't expected her to. I picked up my bag. Rehearsal stood. We walked to the door. My hand was on the knob when Gwyneth said very quietly, "Mirrorly." I turned around. I wanted to tell you dozens of times. I didn't know how. And there it was, the sentence that was supposed to function as absolution. The sentence that was supposed to rebalance everything. I wanted to tell you. I didn't know how. As though the not knowing how were a force of nature, a geological impediment, rather than a choice made fresh every morning for 31 years. I know, I said, because I did know. I knew exactly how the wanting and the not doing coexist, how a person can genuinely want a thing and genuinely not do it for decades, how the desire and the inaction are not in conflict, but are in fact the most stable partnership a coward can form. I left. In the car, Rehearsal didn't start the engine immediately. He sat with his hands in his lap and let me do whatever I needed to do, which turned out to be pressing my forehead against the cold glass of the passenger window and breathing. After a while, he said, "I'm sorry I didn't tell you about the background check before tonight." "Why didn't you?" "Because I wasn't sure, and I didn't want to give you a reason to doubt yourself before I had proof. I didn't want to hand you a story that might be wrong." I thought about that, about the kind of love that waits for evidence before it speaks, that considers the weight of doubt on another person's shoulders, that doesn't trade in suspicion and still manages to see clearly. "The wedding is still in 14 days, I said. "Yes," he said, "it is." "I don't know who I am anymore." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "You're the person who sat at that table and didn't argue, didn't perform, didn't fall apart. You just listened. You let the truth have its own weight. That's not a small thing merely. That's actually a very rare thing." I thought about the paper chain above my desk, 13 links left. Take me home, I said. He took me home. In the weeks that followed, the wedding, which was small and honest and nothing like what I'd planned, attended by people who knew the new version of my story and loved me for both, I found Rowan's journals. My father. My real father, or the man I would always call my father, regardless of chromosomes. He had kept journals since his 20s, thick, marbled notebooks he'd stored in a fireproof box in the basement. I'd known about the box. I'd never opened it while he was alive because it felt like touching the inside of a person without asking. I opened it now. In an entry dated November 1993, Rowan had written in his small, engineer's handwriting, "She arrived today, 3 days old. She has the expression of someone who has already decided something. We don't know what yet. Sela cried for an hour and laughed for an hour and then made soup. I sat with the baby on my chest for a long time. I think she's going to be difficult in all the best ways." I read it twice. Then I put it down on the kitchen table and looked out the window at the yard, which had the particular quality of late autumn light, that amber slant that makes everything look briefly, unbearably precious. They had known. They had known I was adopted and they had kept it from me, and I had to sit with the grief of that too, the less dramatic grief, the quieter betrayal of two people who loved me fiercely and still could not bring themselves to hand me the most basic fact of my own origin. I understand it now. I have thought about it until I can hold it without it cutting me. People protect the things they love with the tools they have, and sometimes the tools are blunt, and the protection is a kind of damage. Rehearsal found me in the kitchen that night, reading. He made tea. He sat down across from me. He didn't ask what I was reading or what I was feeling because he had learned over 4 years that I would tell him when I was ready, and that asking before I was ready was not patience, but pressure. I told him about the journal entry. I read it to him. His face did something specific when I read the line about difficult in all the best ways. Not quite a smile, something quieter, a recognition, as though Rowan had described not just who I was as a child, but who I still was now, sitting in this kitchen at 31, rebuilding the floor of my own history plank by plank. "He was right," Rehearsal said. "About which part?" "All of it." I folded the journal closed. I put my hands around the mug of tea. Outside the window, the autumn light had gone and the dark had come in its place. That particular dark of early winter that is not threatening but simply final. A curtain drawn with no performance left to give. I thought about Gwyneth. Across town in the house I now understood was 3 blocks from where I'd grown up. I thought about her in the evenings, going about her routines, carrying the relieved, terrible lightness of a secret that has finally, after 31 years, been permitted to be heavy. I didn't hate her. Hatred requires a kind of sustained engagement I don't have the architecture for. What I felt was something more like the emotion you feel when you find an old letter that was never sent. A mixture of grief for what it contains and something almost like pity for the person who couldn't send it. She had made a small life around the rim of my large one and called it enough. I had a different name for what she'd done, but no name is clean enough to say in a room you want to keep warm. Rehearsal and I were married on a Saturday in the small courtyard of a building he loved because it had an asymmetrical staircase and windows that faced north. 12 people attended. My best friend Kaylin read a poem about salt and coastlines. The officiant was a woman named Perdita, who had known Rehearsal since childhood and wept twice during the ceremony for reasons she later declined to explain. I wore my grandmother's ring, Sela's mother's ring, which made it not a blood ring but a chosen ring, which seemed, under the circumstances, more appropriate than anything else. When they asked if I would take Rehearsal, I said yes without hesitation, without the tremor I'd expected, without any of the complicated static of the preceding 14 days. I said yes clearly, in a voice that carried across the small courtyard and into the northward windows and out into whatever was beyond. The secret child my parents had warned Rehearsal about was me. I had been the warning. I had been the weapon. I had been all along the thing they were most afraid of, not because I was dangerous, but because I was evidence, alive and walking around and loving someone enough to marry him. I was the daily breathing proof of a thing they needed to remain theoretical. And Reveille, with his background checks and his steady calm and his habit of waiting for evidence before he spoke, Reveille had simply refused to let the weapon work. That's the thing about people who love you correctly. They do not need you to be innocent. They just need you to be true. And when the world lines up to make you unbelievable, they put down their phones and ask the question that unmakes the lie before it can take root. Is this the child? Yes, I am. And I am standing here, ring on my hand, tea in my cup, father's journal on the table, husband across from me in the late winter dark, and I am the most located I have ever been in my entire life. The floor is solid. The walls are true. The light is coming. If this story moved something in you, hit like and subscribe, because the next one is already worse, and you'll want to be here when it breaks.